Hello, welcome back to another week of Sunday School Highlights for June the 7th, 2020. This week's lesson subject is entitled A Time of Action. And time has so much significance. Everything what revolves around time, a time to live, a time to die. Sometimes a time to be happy and a time to cry, a time to be still and a time to be moved to action, a time to be quiet, to be silent, and a time to talk. And where we find ourselves in the midst of that time, being able to have wisdom to discern what it is that I am exactly supposed to do in this moment. And so, as the subject says today, though, a time of action, which means that we're to be doing something. We've got to be in movement. And so, what is it that is actually is it time for you to do? What is it that should be in movement, in action, moving forward, doing what it is that God requires of each and every one of us? And so this week's lesson comes out of the book of Proverbs. And anybody that's read any of the scriptures out of the book of Proverbs, you know that it is a book that is full of so much wisdom, so much instruction, a lot of basically biblical wisdom. There's a lot of brief sayings that's based on what God's perspective of human life. It gives us an opportunity to read these scriptures, and it gives us timely principles on how we should actually be living our lives, what our character should look like, and how we should conduct ourselves. And Proverbs is just a book that provides very practical ways of living. And the book is mainly written mostly by Solomon, but there are other writers in the book of Proverbs, and definitely in the times that we are living in now. Now, wisdom is more important than ever, because sometimes we say things, we move to action that it might not be the appropriate way to do it. And when we have wisdom, we have the ability to discern, to think through, to apply those things that God would have us to do in a way that they're most impactful, in the way that they truly make a difference, in a way that what we can be heard. So as we move through the lesson today, if wisdom is something that you feel you desire that you don't have, all we have to do is simply ask God for what we need, and He will give it to us in the portion that He feels suitable to bestow it upon us. So today's lesson comes out of Proverbs 1, first through the fourth verse, 7 through the 8th, 10, 20 through 22, and 32 to 33. Again, that's Proverbs, first chapter, first through the fourth verse, 7 through the 8th, 10, 20, then through 22, and 32 through 33. And I will be reading out of the King James Version today. And so I'm going to start reading verses 1 through 4. And it talks about the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, the king of Israel. To know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, and judgment, and equity, to give subtly to the simple, to the young man, knowledge and discretion. So we see in first verse, it talks about Solomon and King David, and we know that Solomon was king after King David. He was the king of Israel, and that Solomon was a person that was given divine wisdom, because he actually asked God for wisdom and he granted it to him, and he was able to take that wisdom and apply it in ways that he was able to make decisions in a way that most people would not have probably been able to do that. And so the fact that Solomon asked for something and God gave it to him. One, God trusted him to use it in a way that he knew would not only be purposeful for the people, but would also edify God in the process. And so when we have a desire for something and we ask earnestly and God grants that to us, then how do we use that which we have been given? And can we be trusted with that that God gives us? And so we see over in what verse 2 where it talks about what wisdom. It talks about to know wisdom and instruction. So what exactly is wisdom? And wisdom is what? Concepts, ideas, being able to make skillful decisions in divine and human affairs because of maybe what past experiences and training. And wisdom truly only comes from a relationship with God. You can't pick up a textbook, get a BA, MBA, a PhD, whatever it might be, and think that from that the knowledge that you gained over your education provides you wisdom, because knowledge sometimes gives you the ability to build the software or the product, let's say, that helps people determine their wealth and their money. But wisdom will show you how to take that money and develop a budget, apply it in a way that it provides what increase or help for others along the way. And so sometimes we might have the knowledge to develop something or the tools, but we don't necessarily have the wisdom that it takes to apply it to make it successful or to make it useful. And it says what? To know wisdom and instruction. And to know something is to mean to be aware of it, to have certainty. So by knowing wisdom, we have what? Divine revelation, that it will help us to know how to speak and act wisely and to give instruction to what others. And then it talks about what? To perceive the works of understanding. When you perceive something, you become aware of it. You interpret or look upon it. So Proverbs would help us not only to discern, but to comprehend what we need to do in regards to wisdom. And then if we look at verse 3, we see also what? Another purpose. It says to receive the instruction of wisdom. And for those who receive something, receiving is the ideal of taking possession of something. So if you are taking possession of something, you are putting yourself in a position to be teachable. And not everybody is teachable. Everybody don't want you telling them anything. They don't want you guiding them because they already think they have all the answers. They know exactly what they're supposed to be doing, and you can't embark anything on them because they're not allowing themselves to be. But if you are in a position where you're allowing yourself to be teachable, it talks about wisdom. And wisdom in here emphasizes the intelligence and the ability to make what? Skillful decisions. And justice just means righteousness, are doing the right thing. And judgment means lawful judgment, applying things in a way that you're being fair to people. And equity means treating people fairly, doing what the right thing is to do. And then if we look at verse 4, it says what? To give subtly to the simple. And that means that Proverbs gives us the what? The easily, sometimes simpler people that are just what? Easily persuaded. Um, the person that has the ability to sometimes tell the difference or discern between what? The right and wrong things. And so if you give to the subtly, to the simple, to the young man, knowledge and discretion. And when we look at youth, when we are young, we are able to be bent a little more. And what I mean by that is that sometimes we can be shaped. Is in time that we kind of soak in information and instruction. If you even think about your children, they have a way of mimicking you, what they see, and sometimes just being a replica of what they are experiencing around them. And so it's no different when they're in young states, then embarking those words of wisdom on them, so that it not only helps build their character, but they are so impressionable, um, and that they can retain that in which you're trying to receive them. And when we do those things, it only shapes them. It provides discipline. It gives them the tool that properly guides them through life and hopefully builds character. And then out of that, they're able to make what rightful decisions, and their actions are appropriately in line with what God would have for them. All right, so now let's read verse 7 and 8. And it says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. My son, hear the instruction of thy father, and forsake not the law of thy mother." So the fear of the Lord, and this fear is reverence. It's not like shaking in my boots, scared, but it is reverence and honor and respect for God. Being aware of God's what mighty presence, that it leads us to want to constantly please Him in our attitudes and in our actions. But then it tells us, in order to have this wisdom, it says the fear of the Lord is the beginning, which means we've got to have this fear of the Lord first before we can actually have any type of knowledge and wisdom. And then it says that what? But fools despise wisdom and instruction. And what is a fool? A fool can be anyone that lacks any type of understanding, judgment, and common sense. And we hear the word. I think all of us at some point in time has been a fool. Can you think any time that you've lacked understanding? You've lacked judgment. You lack common sense. You look back on the decision and you made, and you say, "Oh my God, what was I thinking?" And sometimes we're not thinking, we're not being smart, we're not using wisdom, we're being a fool, we're being self-righteous, self-serving, not interested in submitting to what it is that God would have us to do, but in our own selves, in our own ways, making our own decisions. And in those moments, yes, we are acting like fools. But wisdom gives us, one, the ability to intelligently make decisions. And then when it talks about what instruction, all instruction is correction. And we have to be willing to seek God first, know Him first. We've got to have that before we can find ourselves in a place where we have gained what knowledge and wisdom. And then verse 8 talks about, my son, what? Hear the instruction of the Father. And those who are wise would really take counsel from their parents. And when it doesn't matter how old you get, if you have living parents, you're still a child. And you should always hear what it is that your parents had to say, because a lot of times they live through or in, have been in the situations that we might be going through in the moment. And sometimes if someone else's life experiences can help shape us and build our character, we should be willing to hear those things. And so knowledge can be gained not only through God, but also through our parents. And we have to be willing to have instruction. And like I said, instruction is just correction. It talks about that coming from the Father, and then the law and the teaching from the mother. And just know that every child, every young person, I think, needs correction. They need rules. It makes them responsible. And these rules should be used as teaching devices to help support our children to become productive Christians. To sometimes you see young folks and you say, "Guys, they are wise beyond their years." And I think when you find that, it's because that child has taken every opportunity to take in what they've been taught along the way, not only from a practical sense, but from the Word of God, and actually taking those things and applying it to their lives. All right, then verse 10 says, "My son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not." Solomon here is telling the young people to be aware of the company you keep. because there are going to be people, sometimes whether we're young or old, they are going to entice you. They are going to encourage you. They're going to put good and flashy stuff in front of your face and sometimes get you to do things that you know are wrong, that are contrary to God. Peer pressure is a real thing. It has been around since the beginning of time. People trying to persuade other people to do um, things that are what out of their character, causing them to commit sin. But even though you might be enticed towards something, doesn't mean that you have to follow, doesn't mean that your answer has to be yes. You can say no. um and that is something for all of us to remember, because sometimes, pressures can, even as adults, you find it sometimes in your workplace. People want you to bend the rules a little bit, or you can do this. And no, you have to be able to stand firmly in that which you know is the right thing to do. All right, let's read verses 20 through 22. And it says, Wisdom crieth without, she uttereth her voice in the streets. She cried in the chief place of concourse, in the openings of the gates in the city. She uttereth her words, saying, How long, ye simple ones, will you love simplicity? And the scorners delight in the scorning, and the fools hate knowledge. So 20 talks about wisdom displaced. Here is being what depicted as a woman, and it talks about what crying out the rules of wisdom. And crying without basically means that God has made this wisdom available everywhere and everybody. It talks about in the streets and in the concords, and that not only is it's available, it's not hidden, it's being spoken through communities by ways of parents, neighbors, pastors, educator, the voice of what? Doing the right thing. Um, in other words, having moral practices that depict the godly living that we should be showing before others. But it is readily available to us all. And it's not something that God will deny if we truly seek after that knowledge. And then verse 21 says, It's cries in the chief place, in the concourse and openings, in the gates and chief places of concourses, noisy gatherings. And in that day, it was sometimes like the open market or the town square, and it refers to the entrance of the city where the elders would sometimes carry on their business. But what all over the city, what we can see that wisdom is spoke, providing words of instruction. And even if we looked in our day and time, there's words of wisdom all over in our churches, through parents, through friends, through ministers. You can find wisdom, and ultimately in the Word of God. If we truly want to know what it is that God would have us to do and how He would have us to live, it is in His Word. And all we have to do is pick the Word up and study what it is that God would have us to do. But then Solomon speaks to what? The group of people. And he actually speaks to three group of people. He speaks to the simple ones, to the scorners, and to the fools. So he talks about what? Ye simple ones. And those simple ones are people that's what? Easily persuaded, are deceived into what? Doing the wrong thing. And he basically said they love simplicity. They love being simple-minded. And then he talks about the scorners. Scorners are people that make fun. They mock anything and anybody, and they enjoy doing it, even to the extent where they might be making fun of the child of God. And if you know that, they truly have to be ignorant to the ways of God, because if they were aware of God's ways, they definitely would not make a mockery of anything. And then lastly, it talks about the fool, which lacks understanding, judgment, and common sense. And it says what? They hate to be instructed, reform. They have a deep hatred for serious godliness. And he talks about them, but then he says, well, how long? Sometimes we see people living their lives and doing all certain kind of things, and we say, well, how long are you going to continue to what? Go down that path. Um, because at some point you have to realize that what? It's not working, that there has to be a change, that you've got to seek what? Something differently. And then the 32nd and the 33rd verse says, for the turning away of the simple shall slay him, and the prosperity of fools shall destroy them. But whosoever hearken unto me shall dwell safely, and shall be quiet from the fear of evil. And so 32, it says, wisdom continues to speak what? To the simple. And the rejection of wisdom by the simple minded basically means that it could have such an effect on their lives to the point, excuse me, that it could lead them to death. And then fools find themselves to continue to follow their what? Own foolish ways, being lifted up with pride, and attaching themselves to any and everything, ultimately what? Destroying themselves. And then with 33, we close with an assurance of safety and happiness to all of those who submit to the instruction of wisdom. And so if we find ourselves to be what? A fool or scorner or simple minded, verse 33 tells us that only if we submit to the instruction of wisdom, if we submit to the ways of God, that we have an assurance for what? Safety and happiness. And so we don't have to live in the confusion of foolishness, mess. And at some point in time in our lives, we need to hear somebody. If somebody can tell you something that helps you have a better life, to be a better Christian, to make more sound decisions, why wouldn't we want to hear that? Sometimes we have to move out of our way and actually hear what it is that God is trying to tell us. So, in my conclusion today, knowing a lot does not mean that we're wise. We can study, man's books. We can get all the college education we need, but it does not make us wise. Sometimes have you met people that are extremely intelligent and then people say, but God, they don't have any common sense. And it's because we think because we can articulate with the best of them that that is wisdom, but it is not. And we can have knowledge, but truly sometimes lack ethical direction. So we have to go before God and ask Him to give us wisdom. And when we have wisdom, you will actually avoid sometimes the pitfalls that life brings. It will grant you the opportunity to be able to see and understand what needs to happen in those moments and be able to decipher through what is the best thing that needs to take place. But if we lack wisdom that comes from God, then we have a moral deficit. And that's true. If we don't have the wisdom that comes from God, we are at a deficit. And inclined to do evil, because sometimes if you don't have the ability to discern when you're in a situation that's going bad, you just kind of fall prey to whatever is happening and going on in that situation. But if we are wise, then we listen to wisdom that comes from God. We're skillful in reasoning and resourceful in applying the truth. So take this time today. If you find yourself in a place of lack, go before the throne. I truly feel that if we open our hearts and honestly seek God and say, God, I need your wisdom. I need to know how you want me to govern over my life. What do you want me to say? Give me the ability to know that in this time, in this moment, what is it that I need to be doing? And I truly feel that He will grant you those things. So continue to be diligent, continue to pray, continue to seek God, because He wants to hear from us. Even though He knows what we need and how much of it we need, He wants us to come before Him in a very sincere place, in a humble place, and talk to Him And you can talk to him just as simple as I'm talking to you, and I guarantee you he will hear you. And anytime we have an opportunity to share wisdom, please do. Sometimes we get so tight with things and we see people headed in a direction and we'll say, well, that's them. I don't have anything to do with that. Or they don't want to hear it anyway. But God holds us responsible. If you've got a word for somebody that's going to help them along the way, then be willing to share it. And then at that point, it's up to them to decide what is it that they're going to do with it. So be blessed. Have a good rest of the week. And I'll be back next week with the lesson. And just know that I love you. I'm praying for the world as a whole because this is definitely a time, like so many other times, that we need God to give us wisdom and direction. Be blessed.